whole team and now these haters salty. Rockin' Zenny shades to the championship strip. That Nick Bosa drop him hard like a hit stick. The Jimmy Ward intercept him with a pick six. Like Debo, we gon' knock him like a brick. The Trey Lance play action to a drop back. When the blitz coming quick, the old line gon' block that. RPO with Kyle Juice, Mitchell and George Kittle, can't nobody stop that. Stand behind Kyle Shanny all the way. It's like a game of chess when he call to play. Brendan Ayuk on the slanter fade. Bang bang, Niner gang all day. I'm talking big body trim.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to IE Sports Radio. I'm Niners Jess, along with Ty Austin, who is on vacation, Maddie B, and your girl Bex. We are the East Coast Red and Gold. What's going on, guys?
Hey, can't believe it's Wednesday already.
The usual.
Yes.
Hijinks, tomfoolery, those sorts of things.
Not tomfoolery. Cut it out.
Yeah, I mean, when the tomfoolery happens, like, that's when it really happens.
Yeah. All right. Well, without further ado, let's bring on our guest. We have special guest, Jordan Elliott, staff writer for Niners Nation. What's going on, Jordan?
Oh, just another beautiful California day. We got OTAs. The sun's out. Can't really ask for much more.
It's been a slow news day as well.
It feels like a slow news month, to be honest. We're really hitting the time of year where, I have to dig deep a little. It's good. It keeps me on my toes. But, the beautiful thing about the NFL is that there's usually no shortage of news for most of the year. But this late May through June is just it's pretty brutal, I'll be honest. So we're trying to make do where we can, right?
Absolutely. Now, obviously, you're a 49ers fan, correct?
Yeah.
How did you become a fan?
I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up about 20 minutes south of Candlestick, and my dad had season tickets there the entire time I've been alive. I think he got him in like 83 or 84. So I'm only 27. I was born in 1995, just after their last Super Bowl. So I spent a lot of Sundays at Candlestick growing up, but it was just past the window of that dynasty. So as much as I cherish it, I grew up watching a lot of football that was, it was football, but it was certainly not what a lot of 49ers fans were accustomed to prior to that. But just going to games there and spending time with my dad and just having it be something, just kind of became clockwork for me every Sunday, or most Sundays, I should say, in the fall, knowing that we'd drive up there early, tailgate, that walk into Candlestick. And it's just always kind of been, a big part of my personality.
Awesome. So you've been to Levi's, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to live literally a mile down the street from Levi's too. So I'm not going to lie. That was one of the few perks of living in that part of North San Jose. There's not much there. It's pretty much Levi's. For those who haven't been there, it's literally the stadium and a bunch of residential stuff. But that was one of the few perks, is getting to walk to games, not have to deal with the parking and all that stuff.
So would you prefer the Stick or Levi's?
I think Levi's has come a long way. If you would have asked me this 3 years ago, even last year maybe, it would have immediately just been like, oh, Candlestick, and it's not even close. I do think that Levi's is starting to form a bit of an identity, but Candlestick was just such a special place. It wasn't the nicest stadium, and I think there's no shame in that, but it had soul. It had a bit of, it had an identity, right? Where it was like, it may have been a dump, but it was our dump. And I think that there was obviously just it was such a mystical place because of the Joe Montanas and Jerry Rices and Steve Youngs and all those great players that came through and played there. But it also, it felt like a place where opposing teams felt a little bit rattled coming into, and it was loud and it was cold and wet and windy, and it just to me, that's what football is all about. It's a game that is played in those elements, and it's a little different when even though you're only 40 miles south, when you're in Santa Clara and you're sitting on that away visit, or the away visiting side, and it's 75 degrees in September, but it feels like 100 while you're just cooking in the sun there. So both structurally and just kind of the energy, I think Levi's has a ways to go to catch up, but I'll be honest, I went to both the playoff games last year, and I thought during the Seahawks game, it was the first time where I was really like, wow, this feels a lot like Candlestick, the energy, the noise, just vibe. So Levi's is getting there, but to me, yeah, it's undoubtedly Candlestick. It's a special place, and it would be really hard for any stadium, following its footsteps to fill those shoes.
Yeah, I definitely miss the stick. You always, I know it was right on the bay, but you always felt a difference from outside to inside. And you're right. Like I was at the playoff game against Seattle as well, and I kind of, you kind of felt like eerie vibes of, the stick. It was pretty cool. So being that you're only 27, what is your favorite memory thus far?
Probably I was there for all those playoff games under Jim Harbaugh. And the Saints game is probably the high point I've had as a 49ers fan, because I just, the swing of emotion those last few minutes, it was a great game start to finish, but just the Alex Smith running into the end zone, you're like, okay, here we go. We got the lead. And then Drew Brees has that big connection to Jimmy Graham. And you're like, oh my, this is it. I've experienced heartbreak my whole life. It's happening again. And then Alex Smith finds Vernon Davis. And I remember just that moment, just 70,000 people at the same time in disbelief, the just joy and elation it was palpable, right? Like you could feel it in the air walking out of there. And it's funny because it's a tough memory, but I really cherish the memory. I went to the Giants game the week after, the Kyle Williams game with the fumbles and stuff. And as much as it sucked, the more and more that I've, distanced from that, I can appreciate just how much that heartbreak kind of defines what it means to love sports and be a fan, because we wouldn't be able to enjoy the highs as much without the lows. And so to go from the high walking out of Candlestick after that Saints game to literally, it was dead silent. I'll never forget going down those escalators and walking back to the spot we used to park on the other side of 101, and nobody was speaking. It was, what could you say at that point, right? And as much as it sucked, it felt it was a good example of the highs and lows again that you experience in sports. So I would say that 2011 playoff run in its totality was probably my favorite memory as a 49ers fan.
Awesome. All right, so moving on to the season, which is kind of fast approaching. All the additions that we made, whether free agency or the draft, who do you think, what player on the current roster do you think benefits from the additions that we made, like Javon Hargrave, Jair Brown? Who do you think?
I would say the defensive line as a whole, because they were already really good, but Javon Hargrave was one of the, I would argue, the 5 best defensive linemen, whether it's edge, interior, in football last year. I went back and I watched pretty much every snap he played over the last 2 seasons after they signed him. I did a couple articles for Niners Nation where I broke down some of the film stuff for his pass rushing moves and some of the ways he was impacting the game. I can't remember a time where I was ever as excited to see a new player with the 49ers, just based on his ability to wreck games and the way that he's going to command the attention of opposing offenses and their game plans when they already have to account for a guy like Nick Bosa and guys like Eric Armstead. I just think that they're in such a great position now where you can't focus too much on one guy, which is incredible because they have the reigning defensive player of the year. But if you pay too much attention trying to isolate Nick Bosa on the edge and take him away, now you have Armstead and Javon Hargrave on the interior. So, and I think that's a trickle-down effect too. It's going to also help the guys on the back end. They're going to have to cover for a little less time back there. So I think just the whole 49ers defense as a whole is going to benefit so greatly from that signing.
And go ahead, Matty.
I was going to say, speaking of Nick Bosa, no Nick Bosa at OTAs. Do you think that is in any way related to him waiting on a contract extension?
I think it's just the optics might be there because of the timing of it. But the reason why I don't really think that is because he's been doing that training program in Florida pretty much his whole career. And I think the 49ers are at a point where it's like, hey, whatever you're doing down there, when you show up here to play, it's working. So we don't want to disrupt whatever rhythm is there. I think, it's always good when guys do show up for OTAs, but I don't think it's, detrimental if guys don't, especially at this point in the off season. And they're working all the time. I don't think Nick Bosa is, in Florida with his feet up on the beach, but I also can appreciate that not all of these guys live here year round. And even if you're a professional athlete and, you can afford the accommodations and stuff, getting on a plane, flying across the country to run around without pads on for a very unstructured practice, to me, I could see why a guy like that would be like, you know what, I'm going to stay local, keep training here. So I don't really think it's necessarily related to the contract stuff. If that trickles over into training camp and he's not showing up the first few days of that, that's where I'd be like, okay, this is something that we should be paying attention to and be keeping a close eye on. But for now, I think it's just, it's a plus if people do show up for OTAs, but I don't knock anybody who's not there.
So no worries about him, Trent Williams, and who is the other? Oh, Debo's not there. Those are the three that I read. Am I correct on that?
I think Debo was there today.
Debo was there.
Oh no, Debo was there today. There was a third that wasn't there. Oh, Hargrave was not there. Excuse me.
I think for those guys, they're proven veterans. They're going to show up, especially when you're talking about a guy like Trent Williams, who's first ballot Hall of Famer. He's the best offensive lineman I've ever watched play on a week-to-week basis. So I think, I'd be shocked if them missing any period of the OTAs is going to be an issue. And they'll all be here in a couple weeks for the mandatory minicamp they have. So I'm not too worried about it now.
But not even having that, because we talked about this last week about having the veteran leadership. Fred Warner's there, Dre Greenlaw. They're obviously not really doing anything, but just the presence.
I think it can help, but I also the biggest thing for me that was really eye opening because I've lived in the Bay Area my whole life. I know how expensive it is. It sucks. I live in a tiny box of an apartment, and I pay much more money than I would like to be, right? And so I think a lot of these guys who do play for the Niners have their places here during the year, but once the season's over and they check out, they go back to wherever they are. And I think some of the guys, because I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, I'm pretty sure Fred Warner is local most of the year because he's in the facility all the time. If he's not, he's just dedicated at a level that's beyond commendable. But I think that plays a pretty big factor into it as well, especially. The more and more I've done this, the more I've gotten familiar with some trainers and some other people in these NFL circles where these guys have a really, detailed regimen that they're going through in the off season. And if they're training with somebody in Texas or Florida, which are typically the two places, and then Southern California, or I should say the three places where you see it the most, I could see how maybe there's more value in them staying and sticking with what they're doing rather than coming again, I don't really think there's too much value in OTAs at this point. I think it's good that there's the ability to connect with teammates and build some chemistry and stuff. But I don't think it's a situation where it's like setting a bad example necessarily because, again, if I'm sitting in their shoes, and especially if I'm Trent Williams and I'm, going into I think it's year 14 now, I wouldn't be too, eager to come over here and, especially for the guys that aren't really how much work can you really get done as a lineman when you don't have pads on, right? I think it's a little bit different for receivers, quarterbacks, working on timing, route, stuff like that. I don't think there's too much that you could really get out of it if you're a player that plays in the trenches.
David McNider wants to know if Ray showed up.
I am not sure, to be honest. I haven't had a chance to catch up with who was there today. I've been busy doing some other stuff, but I did not see, to be honest. I wish I could help out and give an answer. Sorry.
Going back to the D-line, Drake Jackson seemed to have bulked up a little bit. What are your thoughts on him from year 1 to year 2?
I really like Drake Jackson coming out. I was a big fan of his. I watched a ton of Pac-12 football, and I thought that he was horrendously misutilized at USC. And I think that ultimately played into the favor of the 49ers because if he had been put in a position to maximize his abilities at USC, I don't think there's any chance he would have been there at the end of the second round where they grabbed him. To me, he has bend and the ability to get off the line in a way that you can get better at it, but some guys just have a baseline of it that others don't. And I think that he's one of those guys where he just has it. And the biggest thing was, all right, he just needs some time to get some more weight on his frame, get a little bit more durable for the longer, more gruesome, NFL schedule that he's going to have to adapt to. And looking at him at the podium today, he looks like he absolutely put on that muscle, and he's looking like he's a player who's going to go from maybe more of a rotational role to an every down, capacity sooner rather than later. So I really like Drake Jackson, and I think the fact that the 49ers weren't as quick to go out and sign maybe a veteran or a more, big name edge rusher kind of signals the belief that they do have in Drake Jackson to be a contributor not only this year, but for the next couple of years as well.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Drake Jackson too. I really hope he takes that leap from year one to year two for sure. Um, the secondary, Diamador Lenore seems like he had a really good day. Jair Brown as well. Do you see Jair Brown just, kind of obviously every position is going to have competition. I don't think the 49ers can stress that word enough. But do you see him jumping into the safety role as opposed to Deshaun Gibson, or is he just going to be depth this year? What do you think?
I think he'll certainly push for it. I also think that, it's really hard, right? Because you have the young player with, at this point, you'd assume a little bit, probably a little bit faster, a little bit easier to recover when you're 21, 22, rather than the other side of 30 with the amount of NFL mileage that Sean Gibson has. But I also think that the experience that Gibson has is something that can't be overlooked. And once we start getting into more, preseason games and training camp 11 on 11s, where it's a little bit more structured, I would be interested to see how much or how often, I should say, Jair Brown might be making a mental lapse or doing the things that are going to happen to pretty much every rookie making that transition, and they should be expected. And that's ultimately going to be what defines him jumping into that role right away. Because even if the athleticism edge is there, the ball hawking, the instincts, all those things that he can do, I think Kyle Shanahan's made it very clear that, they want dependability and reliability. And I don't think it's an indictment on Jair Brown at all. If there is a little bit of an adjustment and there is a little bit of time that it takes to progress into that, I think that there's a very unrealistic expectation placed on a lot of draft picks where it's assumed that they just need to come in and start from day one. And we saw with the other safety, with Talanoa, he was a guy who kind of worked his way into that role. And then in year two, he was an all-pro player. So just a little bit of patience ended up paying huge rewards. So I think he'll absolutely push for the job. But I also think Gibson's experience and knowledge and just the feel he has with all those NFL games he's played will make it much harder to jump him out of that spot, even though I think Jair Brown's a fantastic player and will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I definitely see that too. Jordan, Ty wants to know if there's any truth to the rumor that you'll be working out with Drake Jackson this summer.
Man, I might last 30 seconds trying to work out. I'm trying to get back into a little bit better shape myself, and I was humbled very quickly. And I wish I could even joke that I'm working out with Drake Jackson, but yeah, he would put me to shame pretty quickly.
Just reading some comments here.
I was very impressed by his Clark Kent glasses today in the press conference. Like, it was very Clark Kent Superman-y. Like, it was very, and I'm not really going to reference DC often because but really that's what I saw when he was up the podium, and he looked ripped. Like, dude looks like he's going to tear some people up this year.
He's a really, really smart guy, too. I had the chance to interview him one-on-one last year, and I talked to him for a little bit just about pass rushing moves, some other stuff. He's extremely well-spoken, really, just a student of the game, and you can tell how much work he was putting. This was middle of the season last year, and even though, maybe the production hadn't quite been there yet and he wasn't really in that prominent role yet, you could see the seeds were kind of being planted. And, he's a guy who I think is all business, which falls in line with kind of who the 49ers have, targeted when they've been drafting players under this regime. But yeah, he's a guy where I think when you can get somebody who has the physical talent, but also is very intellectually gifted and has the drive to excel at both, that's what sets the good teams apart from the great teams. I think he's one of those players that can contribute heavily to that.
So another player who could possibly contribute, Javon Kinlaw. What are your thoughts on him? And pretty much I would see him being a rotational piece this year.
I've always been a big believer in Javon Kinlaw, and I think that the unfortunate thing is that we haven't really gotten to see him get that growth yet. Like, we talk all the time about, how Trey Lance hasn't gotten the reps yet, and we're not going to see improvement until there's reps, and they go hand in hand. I think the same thing can be true for Javon Kinlaw. He's had a couple of unfortunate injuries that have set back that timeline. That ACL reconstruction he did really kind of it took away a good year and a half or so, because even though he was on the field last year, typically you're not going to see a player of that size coming off that surgery really hit their stride until the second year, which he's going into now. So I've always been a big believer in the potential in the ceiling that's there. And I think just like you mentioned, if he's a guy who's in a rotational role where they're able to maximize, 15, 16 snaps a game rather than 40 or 50, we could see him get comfortable, get those reps under his belt. And, you see the flashes, like the very first play of the season last year in that first game against Chicago. He, on that first play of the game, tossed aside a 300-pound guard with one arm and got in the backfield and forced Justin Fields to throw a ball into the dirt. And it had me kind of like believing, like, okay, this is it. Like, what I've seen on tape, this is what he showed in college.
Javon Kinlaw's season is here.
It's here. I was ready. Against Denver, I thought he had a great game as well. The only issue was that knee swelled up a couple times, and I don't think it ever was able to get quite right. I did an interview with orthopedic surgeon this offseason talking specifically about that, and he said all that stuff kind of, it's normal for a guy that size coming off an injury like that. And his whole takeaway in the big picture was, don't be concerned about last year. If he goes into this year and those setbacks are there, that's cause for concern. But this year is really going to define, can this guy play in the league for a few more seasons, or is his body just going to be in a position where it just might not ever allow him to play 15, 16 games a year? So I'm remaining optimistic because I think the defensive line is deep enough now that he can be used in that rotational role. And I always am going to bet on talent. And I've seen the talent there. I just think it's a matter of finding some consistency and really just, finding some luck. I hate to say it. It just seems like he's really just had bad luck with injuries. And that's always really unfortunate, especially for guys that have worked as hard as he has to get to where he is.
So speaking of injuries, the quarterback position, which nobody talks about at all. Brock Purdy had a throwing session, according to John Lynch, and they were actually encouraged. What do you think about John Lynch's comments today on, he was on Sirius XM NFL radio with Bruce Murray. And
Murray in the morning.
Yeah. He didn't say anything too earth-shattering, but he was asked about Brock Purdy. And he still, in my opinion, he reiterated what he said in March, that he's the leader of the clubhouse and that there will always be competition. What are your thoughts on his comments in March, his comments today? What do you think about this?
I just think that Brock Purdy I thought he played well down the stretch of last season. The Niners won every game that he didn't exit with an injury, and they won a lot of those in convincing fashion. They were scoring a ton of points, and I think that everybody in that organization knows how gifted Kyle Shanahan is and how deep the skill position players are, how great Deebo Samuel and Kittle, Ayuk, McCaffrey, like they have all of the pieces in place. They just need somebody who's going to be able to effectively distribute the ball to those players and allow the scheme to do a lot of the work. And I thought Purdy did that. And I think a lot of the discourse surrounds, the individual talent of the quarterback, which for most teams is really important. But for the 49ers, especially given their current makeup, they don't need a superstar quarterback. They just need somebody who's going to effectively distribute the ball. And he did that really well. And I think that the plan kind of was, had he not gotten hurt, he probably would have been the starter going into this year, which they've said the leader in the clubhouse stuff kind of over and over, and they've kind of reiterated it. So I can't really fault them for feeling that way, because I think it would have been really hard to just have Purdy play as well as he did and then abruptly be like, okay, well, we're pivoting to somebody else, or, this person's the starter because we drafted them higher, but Purdy has to earn his job back. To me, it always made more sense. Do what they're doing, and then, hey, if Trey Lance comes in and he looks really good, he's throwing the ball well, the offense looks good while he's commanding it during, this offseason period, training camp, preseason, I think it's much easier to then go, hey, well, Trey Lance is playing so well, we have to get him on the field, rather than, like, it's easier for Purdy to have his job taken by a good performance than to just give it to another player coming off the season he had, if that makes sense. So I think that they put themselves in a great spot to do what they always preach, which is, no matter where you're drafted or where you're taken, there's always going to be competition, and the player we think performs the best will be the one to win it. The only issue is Purdy doesn't seem like he's going to be able to participate in a lot of this offseason program till optimistically August. So the thing I keep coming back to is, what can Trey Lance and Sam Darnold do while they're throwing in the end of May in shorts and a t-shirt, or throwing during training camp, or playing even in preseason games, that's going to outweigh what Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, and that team felt that Brock Purdy did going into Seattle in December and winning the division in a really tough place, playing a really tough Cowboys team and beating them in the playoffs. Like it feels like they're so set on Purdy being the guy. The only way I see that not happening at this point is if the injury timeline doesn't add up and they're forced to start somebody else, because I keep coming back to, like, what can these guys do in training camp that's going to outweigh playoff success and, playing football games in December when the schedule gets really tough and the games are really, really important. So I think it's really just Purdy's job to lose at this point, and the only way he would lose it is if he's just really not ready to go from a physical standpoint by week 1.
And John Lynch did mention that they wouldn't do anything to jeopardize his rehab process. I know a lot of people are concerned that they would rush him back, or, if he is ready by week 1, that means, they rushed him back or whatnot. Who do you think is going to be QB1 to start the season?
I think it's going to be Purdy because, and again, it's super unpredictable. We don't know how it's going to go, but I think just based on what they've been saying, they have to have some indication from whatever medical professionals are advising them on this all that he's going to be good to go by then. I think that, getting Sam Darnold and having Trey Lance are good safety blankets if that's not the case. And I think that they've insulated themselves really well in the case of quarterback injury, which for them, it feels like it's inevitable. It happens every year. It's getting really sad at this point, to be honest. But I just think it's got to be Purdy based on that. There could be some setback, but I think that they're optimistic he'll be good to go. And I think that they saw enough. There was enough chemistry there that even if he only gets a couple weeks of training camp and maybe one series in the preseason, whatever it might be, I think they'll feel strongly that he's still the guy until he proves otherwise.
Okay. The offensive line. Chris Forrester had said Joey Fisher is definitely a guard. Colton McKivitz at right tackle, Spencer Burford at right guard. Are you surprised by that?
No, I'm not. I really like Burford. I think he's going to be a great player. And I like what Forrester said, where he's told him, hey, don't be looking over your shoulder. Like, this is your job, especially coming off a year where they had that really kind of, it was odd, that kind of rotation at right guard, where every other series it felt like it was Dan Brunskill and then Burford and Brunskill. It's back and forth, which I think is really hard to get into a rhythm when you're a young player and you're dealing with that. So I think that Chris Forrester is tremendous at what he does, and I think he's done a really good job shaping that Niners offensive line. So I think having him be a loud voice in that room and being able to advise those decisions on who should be starting and how many reps they should be giving these guys, it's a tremendous luxury that the 49ers have. The 2 seasons he's been there, the 49ers have been a top 10 pass blocking unit in each year, and they hadn't been in any of the previous 4 years under Kyle, if I remember correctly. So he's left his mark immediately, and whatever he's doing with these guys week to week, leading up to seasons, their pass protection has improved tremendously. So I'm a big believer in whatever he's earned the benefit of the doubt with me. Whatever Forster thinks is the right move on the O-line, until I'm seeing otherwise, or they're giving up 15, 20 pressures a game. I think he's earned the right to call those shots.
Or do you think he's an upgrade over McGlinchey?
McKivitz, I think McGlinchey's a good player, and I know it's not super popular amongst a lot of fans. I know a lot of people feel very strongly, and it's what makes football discourse fun, right? It wouldn't be fun if we all agreed on everything. I think Mike McGlinchey is somewhere between, I'm not saying he's an elite player, but I also don't think he's just an average or below average player. I think he falls kind of in the middle. To me, the biggest problem is that when he did have errors or mistakes or he'd get beaten, it was either in a really crucial spot in the game or it was in a way where it looked really bad. Like, perfect example, going against Micah Parsons, he's one of the best edge rushers in football, but he got hit with that kind of hump move that Reggie White used to do, where he pretty much just takes one arm, hits him on the shoulder, and Mike McGlinchey's 6'8", 300 pounds, and he's like vertical. He's literally like flat sideways like this. I've never seen anything like that in the time he's been in the league, but I'm like, man, like, this is rough. And, he had a lot of really good reps in that Cowboys game. But all anybody can see is this play where Micah Parsons literally has him laying, like he's off the ground completely, and he's like lying flat 2 feet above the ground. And I'm like, all right, well, this is why it's really hard to have, conversations, because I think that it's really hard to get past the optics of that, where people are like, okay, well, you're telling me Micah Glinchey's good. Let me show you this picture of him getting tossed aside by Micah Parsons like this. So I think it's really just a matter of, differing opinions on that. But I do think that there is an issue with having a guy who does have those lapses in big moments, whether it's a crucial drive where you're trailing, or a 2-minute offense, or a 3rd and 8 or something like that, and you get a holding penalty, false start, or you get beat. So I think McGlinchey's a good player. I think he'll be missed, but I also think that there's a lot of confidence in McKivitz, and the fact that John Lynch had mentioned that they had explored trading McGlinchey last year because they knew they wouldn't be able to keep him means that, McKivitz was really the only other contingency plan they had. So if they had that belief last year, I have to believe there hasn't really been anything that's changed since then. So I wouldn't say he's an upgrade, but I also don't think that it's going to be this drastic downgrade, and it's going to be like all 4 spots in the offensive line are really good, and then this 5th spot at right tackle is what's costing them. I don't think that will be the case.
Okay, another quarterback question. Is Purdy going to be in football shape, and do you think he'll have a sophomore slump?
I think the football shape that's a great question. And I think it's really tough because, Jimmy's he was, I think, an 8-year veteran going into last year. He'd been in the league for a long time, didn't get training camp. I didn't think he looked good the first couple of weeks of the season, especially that Denver game. I was there in Denver for that game. That was one of the worst quarterbacking games I've ever seen from a starting quarterback that's played for the 49ers in recent memory. And there's been a lot of bad ones.
Horrific.
And I think a lot of that just was kind of rust. The timing's off. You're not really, because as the season went on, he improved. He looked a lot better. And, that's a guy who's in his almost a decade into the NFL. So for a guy like Purdy, who's just going into year 2, I think that we can't really, sweep under the rug if he misses his training camp and he's not there for a lot of the offseason program, because as much as, he's diligently working and doing his rehab and stuff, that timing really matters. And maybe I'm just reading too much into it because of that memory of that Denver game is still just like burned into my brain. But I remember coming off that, I'm like, this really just seemed like a guy who is rusty and kind of shaking the cobwebs off a little bit. So I think that is a great question. I don't know if he'll be in football shape, but the more time he misses in camp, the more that discussion I think needs to be had. And the closer we need to pay attention to kind of, if he is missing throws a little bit, how is the timing off a little bit? Is there all these little things that on their own might not be a problem, but if they compile and, snowball over the course of a game, it could be the difference between the win or loss early in the year.
I worry about him seeing ghosts, worrying about getting hit and getting hurt again.
I think that's a great point too. I think with Purdy, he's one of those guys where I would be more confident that he would be able to shake that stuff off, because he seems like the kind of guy who just has that like fearless, I hate saying it factor because it doesn't really have a definition.
Right.
But I think if anybody's going to be able to work through that and overcome it, it's him, because he seems just, very poised. The way he was able to come on that field in that Dolphins game and lead the team right down the field, score a touchdown drive, a couple drives into his NFL career like that, I thought spoke volumes just to how, he's one of those guys where it just feels like they have ice water in their veins. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. But for me, he's a guy who, with the small sample size we've had, it was 7-8 games. He just seems like he's kind of got that cool as ice mentality where maybe that's kind of stuff won't phase him, or at least we hope so, right?
Right. Because he hasn't been injured like that before either. So you don't know what that does to someone's psyche, but it'll be interesting to see, right, how he develops over the next few months.
Yeah, especially because I think the great point that you're making is he didn't see the hit coming too. So I think that's another thing where it's like, how is that going to affect you if, you're sitting back there, you're like, okay, man, I held the ball for 2. These guys are all operating on internal clocks. He's like, man, I've had the ball in my hand 3.5 seconds. Like, that hit's coming. I know it's coming. And I do think it was a total Murphy's Law thing where it's like, if he gets hit maybe like an inch higher on his arm, or else, yeah, it's different. But I think that's absolutely a great point, because it's not something where he really saw it coming. So maybe his internal clock will be sped up a little bit. I think that's something that happened with Jimmy actually after his ACL injury. Even though that was outside the pocket and it was him running, it felt like his internal clock ramped up a bit where if the first, second read wasn't there, even if there wasn't pressure, there were so many times where he had a clean pocket, either sailed a ball or looked to get out. And like, man, it seems like he's maybe that internal clock sped up a little bit and he's not giving himself the time that he really has.
That's what I used to say about Jimmy too. He would see ghosts when, and make these awful plays when he had plenty of time to really to do something. There's wide open guys down the field. And what's he doing? Check down and throwing it, this short dump pass to get rid of the ball so he doesn't get hit.
Mm-hmm.
So and you hope that those things aren't, don't happen or don't develop. But, I do worry about that a little bit.
Do you think teams have figured Brock out?
No, I think that a lot of teams, I remember a couple of years ago when people were talking about how the league had figured Patrick Mahomes out. And if you just play two deep safeties, you play a lot of cover two, force him to check down and throw short to intermediate, it takes away a lot of his effectiveness. And that obviously didn't really pan out the way that narrative was building up. I'm not saying that it's the same because Patrick Mahomes is a generational talent who's going to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But I think as long as Kyle is the guy that's, pushing the buttons and kind of is, he's like the puppeteer almost, kind of orchestrating this whole offense, I don't think that defenses will be able to slow down the offense. And in turn, I think that the quarterback who's operating it won't be figured out in a sense, if that makes sense. I do think there are certain tendencies that teams will pick up on, and they'll see that there's certain throws maybe that he's more willing to make than others. And I thought that, Dallas, for example, had played a really, really good game defensively in that playoff game. And I thought that they took away some things that I'm sure they had seen on tape over the first few games. So I think that there will be I'm not saying like the book's out on him, but I definitely think the more games he plays, the more defenses will be in an advantageous position to take advantage of some of that stuff. But just looking at that offense and the guy calling plays and the players that Purdy would have at his disposal, I have a really hard time, thinking that teams are going to be able to slow him down and in turn slow down the offense as a whole.
Let's see here. Beto, Niner Sickness Podcast, would like to know what are your thoughts on Willis, our tight end from Oklahoma? If you watch any tape on him during college.
Yeah, I really like him. I think he's a guy where he has a ton of value as a receiver and the things he can do as an inline tight end. But he also played all over for Oklahoma. They had him doing all kinds of stuff. He was even a wildcat quarterback at a certain point. So, if we get sick of quarterback controversies with all the players involved now, we can throw Braden Willis into that as well at some point. But he was a guy who I thought did a really good
starter competition between him and Christian McCaffrey.
Right, and it'd be a change of pace. Right, to me, it'd be welcome. Talking about the same things all the time. Let's change it up a little bit, right? I think he's going to be a good player for them, and I also think that he's a guy who, I don't think Kyle Juszczyk's going anywhere anytime soon. But we saw a couple years ago when he had to miss some time. I think he had a broken finger, if I remember correctly, in 2019. Mm-hmm. And Ross Dwelly stepped in and was, kind of that emergency H-back, fullback, whatever you want to call it. Willis did a ton of that at Oklahoma. So having a young tight end on a cost-effective deal who can do that as well as block really effectively, was a receiver that they counted on a lot in that offense at Oklahoma, particularly this past season. I think there's a lot to like there. So I think he, for now, provides really good depth, and I think there's a ton of upside there. But the versatility to me is the biggest thing where I'm like, man, you can put this guy all over the field and find ways to utilize him. And on a team as good as the 49ers, it's really hard to make it as a seventh-round rookie on the roster. Having that versatility to me gives him a leg up maybe over some of the other players he might be competing with.
So in keeping with the tight end position, the other tight end that we drafted, Cameron Latu, where do you think he stands? Obviously, Willis, as opposed to Charlie Warner and Ross Dwelly. And I'm leaving George Kittle out of this.
We hope his job's safe, right? We hope we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Right. Hope so.
It's interesting because, again, I think the Niners are a team where, the first year as a third-round pick, I think he's pretty much a lock to make the roster this year. It would have to take a horrendous training camp or offseason, something really bad for him to not make it. I think that the 49ers see something there where I think they are betting on the upside and the player they can turn him into rather than maybe the player he's coming into the league as. And that doesn't mean he's, not coming in as a good player who can contribute, but just based on the consensus and where a lot of people had him, mocked, which again is an inexact science, right? Like mock drafts and draft experts and all that stuff. It's really hard and nobody really has all the answers. But I think the 49ers taking him where they did really signaled that they see a guy they can develop into, at minimum, a high-end depth guy that can be, a 1B to a 1A like Kittle. And that's where I kind of envision him making that transition. The problem is that tight ends, to me, tight end's the hardest position to transition to in the NFL. Typically, it takes guys 2 or 3 years before they really have that big breakout, save for a few, exceptional exceptions to that rule, players that are just defying the norm. So I think he's a guy that they look at where we don't want to talk about it. It's not something that you want to ever think about. But, a couple years from now, who knows what the future holds for George Kittle? Maybe he is a guy where he's like, man, I've taken a lot of punishment over the years. I've made some money. As much as we'd love to watch George Kittle play football forever, that's unfortunately not the reality of it. So I think that's another scenario where they're planning long-term where should that situation arise, which, again, nobody's hoping for, and the 49ers especially aren't hoping for. But if it does come up, then you have a guy that you believe in, that you've had a couple years to, develop in-house, teach in your own scheme and have them play the position the way you want with a guy like George Kittle to be a resource. So I think he's a guy who has the ability to be depth now, but potential to be the number one option down the line if that opportunity presents itself.
Jordan, I just want to warn you that you're already blocked by Jess and your signal. You're about to lose signal because you just said something bad about George Kittle.
Well, he's clearly got a career like posing for like
pineapples,
modeling careers, things of that nature.
I love George Kittle. I think that he's a guy that, to me, the greatest compliment you could give any journalist, athlete, anybody involved in sports, to me, the greatest compliment you could ever give them is that they make sports fun. And I think George Kittle makes the sport of football fun. The way he plays it, the energy he has, just the way he attacks working out in the off season, the way he is. And I can tell anybody who hasn't had the chance of, encountering him, that's not an act. He is that same kind, goofy guy in person, very, very, very generous and kind person. I just also know that at a certain point, the window runs out for everybody. And I think that, it's something that you don't want to think about anytime soon, but
she's over there on the finger.
Yeah. I would hope, again, it doesn't happen again for quite some time, but I do think it is something that you have to prepare for in the long run.
No, I definitely agree with you. George Kittle is actually my favorite player, if you haven't figured it out. So anything that's always said, I'm kind of like, oh man, But so running backs, Elijah Mitchell, Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, TDP. What do you think about Jordan Mason?
Big fan. I am extremely impressed with what I saw from him. He was a guy last year that I was really keeping a close eye on going into camp. And then at training camp, a lot of the days when I was there last year, I was like, man, he looks like the best running back of the group. He's running as hard as anybody else. He's making the right cuts, the right reads. I'm like, this guy is going to be a player. So I was really excited when he made the roster because I was like, yes, even if he doesn't have a clear path to touches right away because of how good Elijah Mitchell is, and then obviously getting McCaffrey, he's going to get a ton of touches every game. I'm like, they'll find a role for him. And it felt like the role they found for him was when games were tight or they had a lead late in the game and they needed somebody to, grind out those tough yards. And when defenses are starting to get worn down a bit, have that guy that can really punish defenders in the open field. And, the last thing you want to do when you've been chasing around Debo and McCaffrey and Kittle for 55 minutes is have to tackle Jordan Mason one-on-one in the open field. And, he did a really good job. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago about it with some more specific numbers. And the one that stood out to me the most is he averaged 6.5 yards a carry last year. Like, he was a guy that when he was getting the ball, he was very efficient with the touches he did get. So I would look for him to have a little bit more of an expanded role this year. And I think actually allowing him to be kind of the Thunder to Christian McCaffrey's Lightning would be very beneficial for the 49ers, where he is a guy that, after having to deal with McCaffrey for the greater portion of a game, having the ability to switch pace a little bit and have a back that's a little bit more of a bruiser that's going to run north to south and run through you rather than around you really plays into the favor of the offense as a whole. So I'm expecting big things from him this year. I think he's going to be a really big contributor for this team.
And Elijah Mitchell, is he on the trade block? Is he with us the whole season? What do you think?
I think it'd be really interesting if they did opt to trade him, because the biggest thing for me with Elijah Mitchell is that he does not turn the football over ever. He is as dependable as they come for any team in the NFL. We're talking about running backs and ball security. And I think that that's so valuable, having a guy that not only can grind out the tough yards, he's obviously had tremendous success since he's been here. But to me, the biggest thing that he brings to the table is that dependability where you just know, like, hey, this guy's not going to cough up the ball. I'm not going to have a game, swing in the fourth quarter because my running back couldn't hold on to the football or the ball got punched out. Whatever he's doing week to week, it's working time and time again. So I would be a little surprised, but I also thought very highly of Jeff Wilson, and I thought he was somebody that they trusted, very closely. And I was a bit surprised when he got moved last year. So I don't think it's something that you can rule out entirely, but if it was up to me, I absolutely wouldn't do it, because I think Elijah Mitchell is just having a dependable running back like that is so valuable, where you just know this guy's not going to lose the football. He's going to grind out tough yards and he's going to take care of the football. And the 49ers have shown, as much as the big explosive plays are there, methodically grinding out yards like that has led to a lot of success for them. And Mitchell's been a big part of that.
So if they were taking applications from the outside, would you apply for the boombox guy?
No, absolutely not. I don't think I can do that. I'm all for, good music, getting hyped before games and stuff. That's a very demanding job. I don't think people really, understand how much goes into that. Because I've seen so many people like, yeah, I want to be the boombox. I'm like, dude, I don't know. For me, at least, I'm like, it's too much for me. I appreciate and applaud anybody who wants to do it. And the thing's huge too. Like, I'm a pretty big guy myself, and I'm like, damn, that boombox is, it's pretty big. Lug that thing around all the time. So I would cede it to somebody else who has a greater passion for that pregame hype than maybe I do. But I think it's a great tradition, and the players clearly love it too. So I'm all for it. I saw in the comments somebody mentioned Joe Staley doing it. Even if they could get it for a game or two, I think it'd be awesome. Right. Joe Staley's he's the man. And if you want that electric, jolt and, fire the team up, who better than Joe Staley to do it?
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea.
I've seen other teams copy that whole boombox guy too. A couple basketball teams had one, and who else? I saw it, and I meant to bring it up a couple weeks ago that people were copying the boombox guy, or before the end of the season. But
people have been copying the 49ers for years. So, what's new? Really?
Remember the brick by brick? Who was copying that? Was it
yeah, you got that. Yeah, you got that. You got this little thing called the West Coast offense. Like, it's ridiculous.
They're going to steal your place for sure, but
your finesse ass 49ers. Yeah. You know how that goes.
Get your own.
Just a few more from me, Jordan. Who is your most important player on both the offense and the defense going into the season?
Defensively, I would say it's Fred Warner. And as much as I think Nick Bosa is incredible, Javon Hargrave's great, Armstead, Mooney, they have so many good players. But to me, Fred Warner is the guy that ties everything together. My favorite 49er of all time is that's behind me right here, Patrick Willis. I grew up watching Patrick Willis every Sunday, one of the best linebackers I've ever seen. I never thought I would see another 49ers linebacker that could rival what I saw from Patrick Willis. And I think Fred Warner has entered that territory where he's a guy that does so much. And especially now, the way the game's changing and how much guys like that are tasked with playing in open space, having to cover the way that he does. And nobody in the league playing the linebacker position covers the way that Fred Warner does. He's running upfield with receivers. Like, you guys remember that pass breakup he had on CeeDee Lamb running up the seam in the playoff? He's doing stuff like that week after week. And I think the problem is that a lot of that doesn't show up in a box score. And if I wasn't watching every snap the 49ers played, I would miss a ton of it too. And I think that that's why Fred Warner maybe doesn't get some of that Defensive Player of the Year recognition or some of that national buzz, because if you're completely erasing a team's receiver as a linebacker in coverage, it's great for your team, but when you're looking at box scores after games, it doesn't show up the same way. Sacks, forced fumbles, tackles, and all that stuff do. So to me, Fred Warner is just he's the guy, especially playing in the middle, brings everything together from the secondary to the defensive line, sets the tone near the line of scrimmage, and just does things that I've never seen an NFL linebacker do. So to me, when he's out there, the thing I always point to, as good as Nick Bosa is, Bosa missed the majority of the 2020 season. Warner had one of his best seasons, and the Niners were still a top 5 defense without Nick Bosa. And they had they had injuries in the defensive line, all kinds of pass rushers. It wasn't even just Bosa. And I thought that was really the telltale to me, where it's like, you made it work without Bosa. Could you make it work without Warner? I would have a hard time seeing them do that, even if the rest of the defense is as good as it is. Oh, that's sorry.
I'm still
sorry.
Amazed, but wow, everything went to hell in a handbasket right there. I said 3 words, and it was like,
we're like, oh no,
like what is happening? I'm like, what is going on? It's so bizarre. Each one of us has like their own generational New Orleans game, right? Like you had the playoff game. A lot of people come on this show and talk about the 2019 game in New Orleans during the regular season. The older generation has the game from 1980, the 38-35 comeback victory. And there was a Monday nighter in back in the day, late 80s, that was pretty good too. It seems like every generation has their own New Orleans game. I just find that fascinating. Like everybody's New Orleans game is a Waterloo, right? Like everybody has their New Orleans game.
You're just sliding me.
That's great.
Would it be great if like somehow my face like could just roll right in there? That would be
like you can use the split screens on your.
Yeah,
That would be kind of
Today
weird.
was 6-hour Boston drive round trip day, so the old hip is given the old bark. So it's old man problems.
I was going to call him out on that too, Ty. I was like, who are you calling old?
Well, us, since our guest has not been alive for a 49ers Super Bowl win, guys. I want to put this in perspective, and it hurts me deeply. So, like, we are the older generation, so I have to point that out because we are. It's ridiculous. We're golden agers at this point.
I'm just blocking you.
Right? Like, I don't know what to say about it. Like, that's just who we are.
Oh, calling me old.
By the time we're done, Jordan's not going to have any friends on the show.
Also, I was looking it up. Shannon Sharp played for 13 or 14 seasons. Gronkowski played for 11, although he took a year off. Russ Francis played for 11, although he also took a year off. So, yeah, he's only 6 years into this thing.
You got time, Jess. You got time.
Yeah.
You got 3 to 8 years left. Okay, that would be my guess before he starts, pineappling full time, or, starts using starts some sort of eggplant sponsorship. One of those sorts of things. So
You never know. All right, Jordan, who is your offensive guy?
So initially I wanted to just say McCaffrey, just based on the way the offense took off, the different things he can do. He's just such a dynamic weapon, but I still think it's Deebo Samuel. I think Deebo Samuel is one of the top 5 weapons in football. When he's on and when he's playing the way he did in 2021, I don't know if there's another non-quarterback that's an offensive player in the league that can change games the way that he can. And I think that he had a perfectly fine season last year, but he just set the bar so high that a lot of the discourse I saw was, Deebo had a bad year, he had a down year. And I'm like, man, it's really tough when you set expectations that high with a historic season. Everything you do after is going to feel kind of like a letdown. But I think he's a guy that just when he's playing at the level he's capable of playing and the 49ers are able to get him the football and allow him to go to work in space, there's nothing else like it. And that's just something that, again, it's really hard to game plan for because there aren't many. I struggle to think of players that just had that skill set to make guys miss and run through players the way that he can. people always say, he's a running back playing receiver. He has a running back's body and the way he's able to, break tackles and stuff. The special thing about Deebo Samuel to me is his ability to understand angles. And some of these touchdowns you see him score where he breaks toward the sideline, and you have defenders lunging at his feet. It's more about his ability to diagnose those angles in real time and take a path to the end zone where, he's quick, and I think he's a lot quicker than he gets credit for. But he's outrunning guys that are faster than him, and it's because of his just mastery of angles and understanding where to attack a defense with the ball in his hands. And I don't think there's a player in the NFL. The only one that maybe comes close in my eyes is Tyreek Hill, where they just have that ability to diagnose that. So to me, it's Deebo Samuel. And I think if Deebo has the year that he's capable of, this team's going to be right back where they've been the last few.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Who's your surprise player on both sides of the ball?
It's tough. I mean, I don't know how much of a surprise it necessarily is, but I do think that Diamador Lenore is a guy who looked really good in coverage last year, and I think that he's a guy that's grown a lot. And again, it comes back to, when you get thrown out there as a rookie due to injuries and stuff, they had that horrid run of injuries at the cornerback position in 2021. People are really quick to write players like that off, but it takes time to get, used to things. And I thought the more experience he had, the better he got week after week. So I think it might surprise people where not necessarily that he's playing good, because I think people are already aware of that, but where he really stakes claim to be that corner opposite Mooney Ward for the foreseeable future. And he's a guy where you're really, buying into him being a foundational piece of the team. I really like Darrell Luter as well. I want to get the chance to watch him a little bit more, but I do like Darrell Luter, and I think he has the chance to develop into a really good player for the 49ers. It's just a bit early for me to, be super confident. I'd like to see it a little bit on the field before I, jump to conclusions, but I have a ton of optimism there. And then offensively, that's hard. I don't just, only do rookies, but I really like Ronnie Bell. I think Ronnie Bell is going to make the roster, and I think he's a guy that's going to surprise people in the sense that he didn't really have athletic scores that jumped out at you or any testing numbers or anything that jumped out. But just watching him play, he was really just technically sound, and he just played the game the right way and played with a ton of competitiveness, came down with a lot of contested balls, was somebody they could rely on in pressure moments. So I think Ronnie Bell is a guy that it might surprise people when he makes the roster and then gets reps during his rookie season at that position where it typically hasn't happened too often with Shanahan there.
Awesome. Last one, and it's from Brian Culp. Would you rather see a Niners Super Bowl victory or the Sharks win the Stanley Cup?
Honestly, I would take either at this point. I'm not picky. I would lean 49ers just because I've seen the Sharks play in one Stanley Cup and they lost. I've seen the Niners play in multiple Super Bowls and lose. I've had, a lot more heart. The Sharks had this thing where it pretty much was expected they were going to have good regular seasons and then lose in the playoffs. So you just kind of got numb to the heartbreak. Whereas the 49ers, it was they're right there. The Kyle Williams game, the Super Bowl against the Ravens, the Seahawks game the following year. 2019, the last couple, it's they're right there, and I'm this is finally the year going to do it. This is finally the year they're going to do it, and it doesn't happen. So just for the sake of not ever having to deal with the emotional stress of is this going to be the year they do it, or am I going to be devastated again? I would lean 49ers, but the Sharks are right up there for me too. I lived in San Jose for a few years, and I was a Sharks fan before I lived there, a lot of the Bay Areas, but you never understand how much that city really – it's the only sports team in San Jose. So that city really – I think a parade, if they won the Stanley Cup, would be pretty special. And it's funny because San Francisco is what gets all the glamour when we talk about the Bay Area and all that. But San Jose is a much bigger city, and they love their Sharks there. And it's been a really rough past few years. So I think if they were able to turn it around and win a Stanley Cup, it would be very special. But I'm definitely going to say 49ers, and I think everybody here would probably feel the same way.
I definitely agree.
Piece of
and some love from the from Beto in the chat.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's very kind.
And I agree with him. Your knowledge is off the charts, and thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll have you on down the road.
Anytime,
Elliott, everybody.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Yeah, let me know. And I know Ty's on vacation, but hopefully, I'll be able to catch him next time. Hope he's having a great time abroad. But yeah, anytime you guys let me know, it'd be a pleasure.
All right. Awesome. Have a great night.
Thank you so much. You guys too. Thank you so much.
Take care. Jordan Elliott, staff writer of Niners Nation. Awesome.
Definitely with the finger on the pulse.
Yes, definitely. Maddie, what did you think of John Lynch's comments today?
Uh-oh.
Same thing that Shanahan said the other week. Brock did it, right? That's all I ever said. Brock did it. It's just a reaffirmation of that. Wild, but here we are.
Go ahead, Becca.
I didn't hear it. I didn't get a chance.
All right, I'm back. I'm really excited.
Are you back?
It's just one of those deals. It's just a rehash. It's a rehash of what he was saying back in early March, and it's really just a reaffirmation of what Shanahan said at the event recently. Brock did it. Brock has done the things, right? Like, they're out there, they've got an obstacle course, and Brock has finished the obstacle course multiple times with multiple different things. So it's Brock's job unless he can't physically perform. And they keep saying it and saying it and saying it, and people on Twitter still fight about who's going to be the number one guy. Like, as long as Brock Purdy's healthy, he's the guy. Like, I don't understand why there's any energy being wasted on this outside of the fact people really want to just get clicks and views and views and clicks. Also, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. But like, that's just that has to be it. I just saw a tweet recently that Sam Darnold took some first team reps today, and people are aghast. Don't you want your backup to like have some run with the people just in case, God forbid, because nothing like that ever happens here. Like, don't you want a little bit of run for that guy?
And it's OTAs. Newsflash.
For the love of Pete, like, come on. Like,
right. Trey had first team snaps last week. Sam got them this week. They just swapped side,
But oh my God, that doesn't mean Sam Darnold's going to be QB1.
What? Yeah, and it's
shockingly, it doesn't. This is breaking news.
Yes,
right. Sam Darnold will not be. Yeah, right. Can you imagine how the preseason games are going to be? Like the breakdown of each one, the film studies, all of it. I'm horrified.
Same.
And I know Ty's on the Trey train, but I read the opposite. It'll be the Raiders wanting to trade for Trey Lance.
They may have to. They may not have a quarterback.
Right. They don't right now, according he failed.
Didn't they draft one? I thought they drafted
did.
They did draft.
Yeah, but he's like, I'm not gonna say he's raw, but like,
Did they bring back
No, they sent Brian Hoyer.
Oh, okay.
Where did Stidham go? Stidham went to Denver, which I thought was weird. But if Sean Payton likes him, there must be something there. And he did have some stuff. So
he did.
And Kyle said they're going to get first team reps. Like, this isn't.
But nobody listens. And if you need some context as far as, John Lynch, like reiterating what he said, you could also go back to David Lombardi's channel. And he has from March, John Lynch's comments that Brock Purdy is the leader in the clubhouse, but, it's open competition and give the guys a shot at the job. Yeah, I don't get it. He hasn't said anything different.
Has the Men in Black thing been approved by the FDA? Did that happen during COVID? Did I miss it? Is that what's happening? Like, everybody just hits the wand at night and we just forget and then we go through the whole thing again? Because I'm running out of reasons. I don't understand. Like, I can understand like a 10-year cycle where maybe you don't understand the things that happened like 10 years prior because you weren't around for it. But I'm telling you, people are like, 2 days later, they're like, John Lynch's on the radio today saying the same things he said in March. Oh, wait, they were the exact same things, but I didn't realize that they were the same things. But I am rabble about it. Like, what? What do you want? Do you want information in the offseason, or do you not want information in the offseason?
Well, they want to hear what they want to hear. And,
Right.
Depending on which side you're running with there for QB1, in any little nuance, especially you see the headlines and people, the clickbait, any little reason to stir up something like Sam Darnold took first team reps. Okay, it's OTAs. Let the man throw the ball a couple times.
Let him take snaps from the starting center.
Like,
I
it's
know,
okay.
right?
And
It's
wasn't there only like 3 of our offensive starters out there today? Most of the defense starters played, but the offense didn't, or vice versa today. But yesterday was the opposite. So he barely got the throw to anybody. So who cares? They're not even in pads. It's just,
And they're throwing against air.
yeah, getting out there to just get to know one another, and really, it's a big fun meet and greet.
That's true.
Yeah, really, you got
Getting the band back together.
Yeah,
That's
get the
really
band back together, play a few riffs, give somebody else a chance to hop up there on the mic, karaoke. Kind of like what OTAs are. It's the karaoke of football, right?
So bringing up the kicker position, Maddie, were you going to say something else? Uh-oh. Oh, okay.
No, I was just agreeing with Becca.
Jake Moody.
No, I was just agreeing with Becca. She made a great point. She called OTAs the karaoke of football, and I loved it.
And there it is. OTAs is the karaoke of football.
Everybody gets a shot.
Jake Moody made all 4 of his kicks.
Nice.
Zane Gonzalez, not so much. Does that say anything?
Natural selection is what it tells me.
So Jake Moody's going to eat
Right.
Zane Gonzalez.
That's really what it boils down to. Like, I think the 49ers knew how this horse race was going to run, and they just wanted to see it happen. And sure enough, gosh darn it, they were right. Did anyone really think they weren't going to, like, did they really think we weren't going to do anything with the with a 4th round pick, a 3rd round pick? Like, you're not going to cut him. They're not just going to be like, oh, we're going to slap him on the practice squad. Like, doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't, I'm shocked. They're making this a competition because everything has to be a competition, but they also need him to, like, work with another pro so that you can see what's happening. It's not like he's coming in to learn under Robbie Gould, right? Like, on the job.
Right.
He needs somebody kind of in that mindset. That's what the competition's for.
Although
I feel
to
bad
some,
for Zane Gonzalez, but as long as he stays sharp, he should be okay.
To some, it's the complete opposite. It's a definite competition.
Poor Matt.
I know.
The dial-up isn't working there in Maine today. AOL went down.
Brian Cope loves his kickers.
Listen, I mean, Robbie's off now, like promoting the golf club that he's playing at all the time. So giving away golf rounds. So
Becca's
Robbie's
stalking
done.
Robbie Gould.
Yeah, Robbie's completely done. So we had to do something. I mean, like I said, kickers are necessities. You got to have a good pair of socks to wear, or those blisters are going to tell you exactly how your feet feel. And look, kickers are essential. They're essential. How many games are won on a last-minute field goal or by making the extra points? You have to have them, and they mean a lot. So, yeah, you want the competition to happen, but I think, as Matt said before he went dark, the lights went out. It's that tie, turning the lights out one square at a time.
Turn out the lights.
Uh-oh, we're breaking out in song now. But yeah, I mean, you have to have the kickers. And if they've brought in Zane Gonzalez for competition, well, then it is what it is. The competition's not going well. But again, it's also OTAs. But I don't think there really is a competition for Moody.
And apparently there was room to spare as well. That it looked like it could go for 60 yards. So that's a plus.
That's the stuff you want to hear, right? There's too
Right.
much. Like
there's leg to go around.
Right.
that, yes, exactly. Like Rockettes, right?
Yeah.
Same deal.
Legs for days.
And I just want to say hello to everybody in the chat. You guys were great tonight. And don't forget to like and subscribe to us, East Coast Red and Gold, on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
And of course, if you go to the website at esportsradio.com, you're going to see 5 different Patreon tiers there. The first one starts at just $5 a month. And that allows you a chance to be featured on a segment of the flagship show, The Defining Moment. Thank you all for continuing to make IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all the sports. iesportsradio.com/East Coast Red and Gold.
Let's go. All right. I'm going to ask you guys the same question that I asked Jordan. Who's your the most important player on both sides of the ball this year? Becca.
Oh gosh, I haven't really given it a whole lot of thought. I'm telling, it's kind of early to really, I think, pick that. Gosh, on the offensive side, it's got to be, I think, the offensive line. I think, Colt McKivitz taking over that spot. You got to have a solid line to give the quarterback time to do his job. So I don't know if he's the most important player, but it's certainly something to watch, making sure that he's going to be able to step in there and really play that position. But I think the quarterback is ultimately always the marquee player on the offensive line. For defense, I don't know. He did make a great point with Fred Warner. I do love watching Freddie fly all over the field, but I think having Bosa and Hargrave on the defensive line are going to be just tough to beat. I think those two are going to just really make that D-line sound special.
I agree with you. Fred Warner is just awesome when he's flying around like a heat-seeking missile.
Yeah, the missile.
And I expect more of that. Obviously, you expect that every year from Fred Warner. And then the offense, I can get behind the O-line, but I think I'm going to go most important player. Good things happen when the ball is in.
Well, I wasn't going to take your boy
George Kittle's hands.
I certainly wasn't going to steal your man.
That's my player on offense. Maddie, what do you think?
Christian McCaffrey, because this offense is next level when Christian McCaffrey is the focal point of it. We saw it last year. They're averaging 38 points. Like 30 points a game for this offense with Christian McCaffrey at running back was like whatever. Like that we do that every week. And there was a lot of times in 2021 that there was absolutely not a single ounce of if we could get to 23 here, it would be a great day, right? Like kind of one of those deals. I think them keeping that offense at that high of a level all year will allow this defense to be even better, because then this defense won't have the pressure of having to shut everybody out every single week, which can wear you down. And if there's one thing that this team needs desperately, it's that 1 seed so that they can have that bye week in between the regular season into the playoffs and have home field advantage and not have to go to stupid places with stupid people like Philadelphia in them. Right? That'd be great. Jackasses.
That's why
outside
I
of the
picked
outside of the nice people I sat with in 218, they were great. The guy that looked like Santa Claus was fantastic. It was really good dude. But yeah, that to me, Christian McCaffrey's that dude. I think if he plays at an MVP level this year, which if you took all the stuff that he had on the other side, and kind of prorated that out for the year, I think he'd be an open and shut MVP. Outside of the fact, unless all of a sudden we're just going to just give it to quarterbacks every year now, and we just call it the quarterback valuable player, and we eliminate everybody else. I would 100% put Christian McCaffrey at the top of any MVP list. So, especially if he plays like he did last year. You just go back to the Rams game. The Rams game was like, oh hey, look at what this offense can actually do. And I think what happened with Deebo Samuel last year is not a knock on Deebo Samuel. I think it's just the fact that Christian McCaffrey does many similar things. He just does it from the running back position, not from the wide receiver position. That's the difference. So he's not going to be getting the ball that much as a running back, or as much as he was as a running back. He's still going to get it, but it's going to be a little bit more effective.
And Deebo also made it clear he wanted to be back in his more traditional role. So you're not going to get as many snaps and downs in all these various positions necessarily if that's what you're going to management saying. I don't.
Did he though?
Exactly.
Because I thought he just wanted the ball.
No, he did make a fuss about not wanting to be used in so many ways.
He made some I believe it was social media comments to the thing, but he never came out and said in any
he
all the
alluded
stuff
to
that
it
was done
in
last year.
part.
Yeah, it was alluded to, but then there was no. After the contract was signed, it was like, oh, nothing ever happened. Everything was fine. Nothing ever happened. Everything was fine. Nothing ever happened. Everything was fine. It was like the Jimmy Garoppolo contract. They're just gonna, oh, there's a delay. We literally have everybody here today for the press conference, but we're not gonna sign the contract today. We're gonna come back and do it tomorrow. Why? Why are you gonna come back and do it tomorrow? You literally set everybody up here. Oh, there's nothing going wrong. There's nothing going on. Oh crap, he didn't pass his physical. Whoa, imagine that. Also, if he couldn't pass his physical for them, how would he have played in a Super Bowl game for us? I'm just curious.
Exactly.
Would that have worked?
Yeah.
I don't think that would have. Or he would have gotten hurt again in the Super Bowl, and then the Josh Johnson experience in the Super Bowl, I think, would have sent us all to
Just
therapy.
made us all jump off the bridge.
That would have been it. That would have been the end. I would have then it really would be the Brock Purdy rule at that point. So exactly. It was rumored and he alluded to it in kind of like those, but with emojis. So we don't know, right? It was like the Trey Lance the Trey Lance Ring Carthon thing. You slap some emojis up there, you don't know. Defensively for this team, the guy that they need to make a next step is Talanoa Hufanga. He needs to get to that. This is going to sound absolutely outlandish, but I'm sorry. This is the standard you're set to. He needs to get to the Ronnie Lott level this year. There were a lot of plays last year that didn't exist because of penalty that got called back. And we all remember usually there was just one blown coverage a game. And it seemed like every time we would go back to film, it would be something to do with him, or was it the area he was supposed to cover, or whatever it was. The Tampa game was the one that really got it for me. It got called back due to penalty, but Brady, snookered him into it basically, right? And that's a second-year defensive back. You're going to have that stuff happen, especially with Tom Brady. But if you're going to get to that next level, you're going to not just be all pro. You want to be Hall of Fame now. You've got to get to that next level and not. We can't have a blown. This defense is too good to have a blown coverage every week, right? And get caught with it. A lot of teams get blown coverages, but they don't get caught with it because the quarterback is getting yanked to the ground or can't see. This team is too good to be allowing a blown coverage every week.
This is a good statement by Tony. CMC was great last year. Can you imagine how great he'll be through a whole season with the Niners?
100%.
Absolutely. All right,
actual
guys.
Team around him and not just 50 carries a game. I think it will work for him. I think it'll help.
And a full off season in the playbook.
Yeah, full playbook and
And it's like he was meant to be here from the start, and it just didn't work out that way. But here he is, and now he's the guy. This. It was one of the few peanut butter and jelly sort of hits right away. A lot of times you see this in the NFL where a guy gets traded or they pick up a guy in the offseason and it doesn't work out for whatever reason.
It's rocky road for a little bit.
Right. Or they just, they keep getting hurt or whatever. All of a sudden, he's just ready to go last year, right? Like, he's just tearing it up. It just.
Yep. We're going to shake
the way he hit the ground running with the Rams game, the fact that he was able to do as well as he was able to do in the Chiefs game based on the circumstances and when he arrived and everything else. And then being able to just hit the ground running in the Rams game and literally just, be the dude from Mr. Touchdown. He can run. The only thing you need to do in that game was put down a drop kick. And he would have had to send the cleats for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
The Niners definitely, I feel like this, I wanted them to go to the Super Bowl every year, but I feel like this could possibly be the year that we actually go and actually win it. And I think everybody should start speaking that into existence.
It is here.
I'm still waiting for that three-peat to happen that was supposed to happen. So I feel like there's a 3-year window, so I want a three-peat. I want to start with this year, and then next year, and then the next year. I think they need to
candlestick dirt.
I think they need
the
to
sand rolling.
Yep. I think they need to. Yeah, there we go. See, Beck's home and everything's good.
We've got
there it is. There's the candlestick dirt.
The spirit of candlestick right here.
Lives on.
Three-peat.
Absolutely.
They should have sold I hope they sold every ounce of that dirt for tons.
I didn't buy mine. So people from the East Coast were out and hadn't been to Candlestick. So I drove them over to basically the rubble pile, and they had a security guard there. So people couldn't just go in. So I had an empty coffee cup, and I just drove up to the security guard and said, "Hey, would you put a pile of that dirt in my cup?" And he goes, "You just want dirt in the cup?" And I was like, "Yes, please." He walks right over to the rubble pile, fills it up, and he goes, "Is this good?" And I said, "It's perfect." I took a selfie with the guy and everything. I'm like, I need to authenticate this.
This is the greatest damn story I've. That's
great.
Amazing.
Where?
That is amazing.
Had a passenger. He's like, "I can't believe you just asked a guy to fill up your cup with dirt." And I was like,
the fact that you had a security guard that wasn't an asshole is actually stunning to me. So, usually in a situation like that, especially in a situation like that where they're literally guarding trash,
a rubble pile,
right?
They're
guarding 4 strands of copper. That's it. What the hell else is going on here? What are you guarding?
So my passenger said, "I can't believe you just asked him for dirt." I said, "If guys can ask me for pictures of the girls, I can ask for a cup of dirt."
I think that's a good rule.
I'll tell you what we do for our team,
Telling you.
Yeah.
The answer's no unless you ask.
I mean, if I have to sell feet pics for this team to win a Super Bowl, sign me up. Let's go.
Oh, Lord.
Whatever we got to do.
Woo!
I'll put it on the line. I'll put pineapples over my toes. It'd be great.
Oh, boy. All right, guys. You ready for that hurry up offense and the 2-minute warning?
Yes.
Let's roll.
We are.
Go ahead, Maddie.
Boy, I don't even know what I've got this week. Don't as a man named Flavor Flav once said, don't believe the hype. Okay. Don't get suckered in to these clickbaity headlines about first team reps and all this other stuff, right? Don't do it. Verify the source. Ask yourself, is this any different than what they've been telling us this entire off season? And does this statement vary in any way from what the coach, owner, or literally anybody else has said this off season? If the answer is no, move along about your day and get ready for your July 4th barbecue or graduations or whatever stuff you've got going on. If there's any sort of variance, that's when you can jump on that. Until then, don't. Thank you.
Go ahead, Becca.
Maddie Soapbox. Good luck to all the players running kid camps. I know Eric Armstead's got a big one going on. I think Tebow's had one or just had his. But the biggest deal is congrats to my big daddy Patty on being inducted into the Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame. And, echoing what...
One down, one to go.
what Matt just
Yep.
said is listen to the words that come out of the coach's mouth, believe those words, and less what you read and hear in other sources. And go Niners.
Special thanks to our guests today, Jordan Elliott, real good football knowledge. Glad we had him on. Also, tomorrow night, join us for the Ladies of the Empire. Myself and Becca will be on there, along with 4 other awesome ladies, 49er fans. And you could also find me and Beto on Friday nights, 8 o'clock p.m. for the Niners Now podcast. Good stuff all the way around. Go Niners. Don't read too much into anything. Let's just get this season going. And we will see you next week.
See you next week. Thanks, everyone.
And of course, for the upstart 49ers, they're 6 yards away from Pontiac. 3rd and 3.
We'll see a pickup sometime on the right side, possibly.
Montana looking, throwing in the end zone.